The number one killer of women is heart disease.
Our awareness that heart disease is our number one killer as women is actually going down. Heart attack symptoms show up very differently in women than they do in men. When we know these symptoms, we can say, uh-oh, and then listen to our intuition as well.
You're tired, you have a headache, you're fatigued, you're nauseated, didn't present like a man, so you're sent home to take a nap, right?
Yeah. Meanwhile, you're having a heart attack.
You're having a heart attack.
I still think it shocks way too many women that we are 2/3 the case of Alzheimer's disease. Menopause and getting older puts us and our brains as women at a special risk, but that's not all doom and gloom. We actually have a lot of control to prevent Alzheimer's or other cognitive issues as our fate. There are things we can do. Exercise being among the best. We have to really become the CEO of our own health.
Today, I feel a rare privilege to talk to you, Meghan Rabbitt, about your latest venture. And we were just talking off air about how this is a different position in your career for you, because normally as a legendary journalist covering all things, all topics, but a lot of, most recently, women's health, you're usually on this side of the mic and not on that side of the mic. So it's an amazing new adventure, but I am so impressed with the vision you cast in writing the Women's Health. This is not the name of the book, but this was the vision. The Women's Health Manifesto, to uncover all of the things. And so the new rules on women's health has done that. And so what was the process as you sat down, having your fingertips on so many experts, on the ability to research the way you're capable of? How did this happen?
It's a funny origin story. Not funny, it's a cool origin story in that I have had the privilege of working for Shriver Media, so for Maria Shriver and her weekly digital news magazine, The Sunday Paper, for nearly four years now. And about a year into working for Maria, I was out in LA. We were doing some brainstorming around content. And knowing my experience as a health journalist, she said, Meghan, I really think we need a women's health manifesto. And I think you should write it. And
by the way.
I know. So when Maria tells you to write a women's health manifesto, you get to work. And so that's what I did. I really started looking at what we have. And we have so many amazing women's health books right now. It really is such an incredible time for women's health and for women taking ownership of our health and feeling a sense of empowerment. And what I tried to do with the new rules of women's health when I sat down to tackle this really big project, which is a lifespan book, it's like what we need to know, everything from our anatomy, puberty, sexual health, gynecologic health, and then getting into the specialties like pain and brain health and heart health. It's like what we have learned when it comes to sex-specific research that I could consolidate and help educate women around. And also really what we need to know to be able to take care of ourselves and advocate for ourselves. So that was really my guiding light, is like, what do women really need to know so that we can feel like reliable storytellers of our health when we sit down with our doctors and really feel like we have the information we need to take care of ourselves and our families.
So as you were researching, and I don't know what your process is, but maybe it includes lists and what's out there. And were you surprised at any area where there were gapping holes? Like, wait a minute, there are 3 references on this. Or did you find things like that?
Totally. I mean, it's women's health, right? And so we have a major game of catch up to be playing right now. For too many years, women were left out of the research we're left out of the research, and we didn't really come at women's health research with a sex specific lens. We assumed that women could take the advice from the male norm, quote unquote, right? And thankfully we are starting to talk about this, how wrong that was, and make up for some lost time. But yeah, I mean, to this day, diagnostic tools that are used to figure out health impacts in women were developed using the male model. I mean, across the board, medications still haven't extensively been studied in women, and certainly not pregnant women. So there's still some guessing games that our clinicians are, as you well know, are still trying to navigate, and so yeah, we have made progress. I think we've made a lot of progress when it comes to the female brain, for example. We know more than we ever did about, we're starting to really have some answers as to why women are 2/3 the cases of Alzheimer's disease, for example. But really what I learned as I came away from all the research and talking to more than 100 all female experts for this book is that we have a ways to go. We can take what we have learned and use it to help ourselves and advocate for ourselves. And we have to keep up the fight. We have to keep advocating for more research, more funding for sex specific research.
Do you think that the gap, the large chasm, actually, it's more than a small gap, it's a large chasm, in the fact that women are 51% of the entire population, and yet less than 1%, if you look at the data, of health research, or 10% of all money appropriated for health research is for people born with XX chromosomes, and less than 1%, or about 1%, is for women over 40. And I ask this question honestly, not in any kind of weird conspiracy way, but I always attribute that gap to how incredibly expensive research is. People think, oh, just go do some research. A simple question can cost millions of dollars. And so in a time where, money is just not free flowing, that's how I have tended to explain it. Let's study one group of people and apply it to everybody. But is that the whole story? As a journalist who has their finger on all things, is that the whole story? And maybe it is the whole story. Or was there a reason other than that maybe women's health and midlife have not been examined? Or because it can't be that simply a matter of money.
I mean, I think you're bringing up an excellent point. Money is a major issue here, right? But I think the more I interviewed researchers and scientists and experts, clinicians, the more I got a more nuanced story, which is also, really for too long, females didn't have a seat at the table. We weren't making women experts weren't making the decisions about what to study, right? Because it was all the men in the room. It was the male doctors and researchers and scientists. And, someone put it really interestingly, which is that, men haven't dealt with this, the crippling pelvic pain that women did. So of course we're behind in research on endometriosis, For men, it doesn't take seeing countless doctors and years to get an autoimmune diagnosis because women disproportionately are impacted by autoimmune disease. And so we're way behind in that area of research. And so we are in a patriarchal society, sadly, and still. And we are just starting to play catch up, thanks in large part to doctors and researchers like yourself, where it's like, wait a second, now I am a loud voice here, and we're going to talk about arthralgia,
Yes. How about that?
How about that? Talk about these issues that weren't even in the lexicon before,
Yeah.
And so I think we're at a really exciting point because finally now women do have a seat at the table, are making decisions when it comes to what gets studied and where the money gets placed for the research. And so again, it's a nuanced story. We're making some progress. We've got a lot more progress to make.
You know what? I am so encouraged by women with platforms like Maria and through your writing, but also women who have been very successful in, let's say, the last 30 years, in my career time. And I'm very encouraged by their commitment to using their influence and, frankly, the dollars they've earned to write this path. And so publicly, I've begun to call on successful women to say, okay, this problem exists. Let's put our money where our mouths are and fund outside of the NIH process. Have you seen more and more women rising up, or as you're having these hundreds of conversations, what are the kind of new out of the box thinking you've seen for solving these problems?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many women who do have a seat at the table now who are saying, this is a problem. What can I do to solve it? Right. So we're seeing amazing progress in the femtech space, for example, people coming up with really cool ideas that are really helping us move forward. Right. And I think, this book that I wrote is largely on how all of us can step up, whether we have a platform or not, and become advocates for ourselves, but also for other women. It's like the more we know and the more knowledge we have and the language we need to be able to talk about our health, the more confident we start feeling about talking about our health with our doctors, which is crucially important, but also with each other, and I think we are seeing this incredible moment where women's health topics that used to be taboo are just not taboo anymore. Like I can't gather with ladies around my age and not talk about menopause, which is remarkable. So of course people are stepping in, using their platforms, and also funding either, if not research, products that are helping us.
I think so, and it's one of my goals, to never lie to my daughters. My daughters are 18, and then daughters and daughter-in-law in their early 30s. So for me, it's not only science, but education, but it's a commitment to my relationships, right? So if we were your book, The New Rules, is not just a menopause book, it's a whole trajectory of life book. So if we were starting talking to the really young millennials, the 30-year-olds, right? What are some of the principles that you've learned that they really need to be aware of?
I think that young people right now they wow me at every turn, because I think young people now are just not putting up with the same kinds of old rules and old paradigms that we in my generation and older, I'd say, just kind of accepted. And so already I think I would tell young people you're starting at a way better place. And so that puts you in the money seat. But I do think young people now, they need to know, we need a better education system about the female body. I think that when we're young, we tend to just move around the world and appreciate our bodies, and then the world gets to us, right? And I think that's true for anybody, everybody, no matter their age right now. And I think it really takes, you know, taking ownership and saying, okay, I'm going to understand this. I'm going to fill in the gaps that I wasn't taught in health class. And I think we still have a lot of progress to be made there when it comes to educating women about our bodies. So I think young people can understand their anatomy, even if they're not
Yes.
going to go to med school
Yeah.
or go into the healthcare professions. We can understand basic anatomy. So that's why my book starts with a chapter on
Yes.
anatomy, so that we have a lay of the land, so to speak. And I think that's great. I think also then I move into a chapter on puberty, because the more we understand these hormonal transitions and can talk about them, it just puts us in a better position to take care of our health. I think some of the new rules that young people right now are embracing, that people in my generation need to maybe work a little harder to
Catch up
embrace,
on? Yeah.
catch up on. I think first and foremost, we have to really become the CEO of our own health,
Yeah.
and our own health care. We need to come at it with this like sort of big boss energy. What do
Yeah.
CEOs do? They look at what they need, information they need. They study up on the information they don't necessarily have a good grasp on. They hire the right people, right? And I think we can think about our healthcare in that way, gathering the right clinicians who will become our healthcare team, educating ourselves with evidence-based information so that we have a good baseline when we go to those doctors and other clinicians, and really taking ownership in that way.
Do you think you use the business analogy with CEOs? Do you think there's a role, especially for the younger women, of making like a business plan for your health? Like, here's a strategic plan for my health and
Absolutely. In
backfilling.
fact, I think that every woman can become a health journalist for their own health. So,
Oh,
what I do as a health journalist is, as you said, I make a ton of lists, right? I figure out, what do I need to research? What studies do I have to look at? Who are the experts that are preeminent in the field who I can call to help me make sense of that research and put it into context, And I think every woman can do this. You might not be calling the preeminent experts in the country, right? But you can do your research, you can make your list, you can then prioritize that list when you go to your doctor and do something that I was taught in Journalism 101, which is don't bury the lead, which means start with the
With the
most
hard
important.
question.
Yeah, start with the most important information. I interviewed a doctor who said, when you come with your list of symptoms to your doc, when you go to your doctor's visit, whether it's your annual gynecology visit or PCP appointment, really prioritize that list and say, hey, here are all the symptoms I'm dealing with, but here's what I think is most important. What do you think? And it's sort of this way to optimize our time with our clinicians too, which is a great thing. And I think that attitude of whether it's being the CEO of your health, whether it's being a health journalist, it gives you confidence. It helps you go to your appointments feeling like I did my homework. I know my body. I can trust my symptoms. And now I'm talking to you about them.
Well, and I can tell you from the clinical side, that is so helpful because if we're talking about a shoulder or a bum shoulder or someone who has a knee that's giving them problems, sometimes we know something's wrong, but we haven't given it enough thought to be able to communicate enough with it. So I'll actually give people the vocabulary. Let's talk about pain, right? The vocabulary of pain. Is it because if I ask you to describe it and the answer is, I don't know, it's just painful, that's harder to help people. But if they've done what you've said and they're thinking, what does it feel like? When does it hurt? Where does it hurt? What makes it better? That's how we use the dismal 15 minutes of time that we're allotted. So I love that preparation piece that you've just said and good doctors want people to be equal partners, right? In this whole process. Shared decision making.
Bingo. That was
Yeah.
another big theme when I interviewed experts. And honestly, Dr. Wright, you really led me to one of the biggest new rules, which is when I interviewed you, you said, women often wear their pain as a badge of honor. It is time to stop doing that. We deserve treatment for pain if that's what we're feeling. And one of the big new rules that I would want women of all ages to really embrace is it's time to stop apologizing for our bodies and our symptoms and our biology.
Why do we do that?
Why do we do it?
Right?
Bingo. Why do we say, oh, I'm sorry to whine. I'm sorry to be a complainer. Meanwhile, we're in agony. You as an orthopedic surgeon see broken bones and cases that are arguably, among women who are in deep pain, right? And they're brushing it off like no big deal. It's time to stop that. That can actually make your pain worse, right?
It can, and we wait too long often. When we could have nipped it in the bud, so to speak.
You may think your bones are fine, silent, but if you're a woman over 40, your bones are talking to you. And unbreakable bone is how you answer back. During perimenopause and menopause, your bone loss can triple without us even knowing it. That is why I created my 8-shield Building Better Bone program, including Unbreakable Bone Nutrition Augment. Built on clinically studied collagen, microcrystalline hydroxyapatite, and the essential micronutrients your skeleton needs. It's the only formula designed by an orthopedic surgeon who spent 25 years rebuilding bone, muscle, and movement. Stronger bones are the foundation of a longer, more powerful life. Start building your unbreakable era today at shop.drvondawright.com.
So if the very young women are being proactive, committing to shared decision making, what are some of the new rules for your generation in perimenopause right now? What are the absolute standards that we have to step up to?
Yeah, I think one of the big themes when I reported the menopause chapter is the importance of tracking our symptoms, right? And really just keeping note. Again, put on that health journalist hat, like you can do it, and just take out a notebook, take out the notes app on your phone, and just really track what you're experiencing. And try not to tell a story about it right away, but really just keep track, right? Because if you're going to make a shared decision with your clinician about choices like hormone therapy or diet changes, exercise changes, your clinician needs to know what you're experiencing, right? To try to help put the pieces together. So I think that's a big new rule. It's like, I can speak personally to this. I brushed off really debilitating menstrual symptoms for a really long time. Turns out it was fibroids, and had I raised a flag about that sooner, had I been proactive about saying, hey, I don't know that this is normal. Can we talk about this? I might have gotten treatment sooner than I did, and that's on me. And so I think that the more we're able to track these things, the better care we can get. I also think it's really important to feel like you're with a clinician, you're seeing a clinician who's really listening to you, like those of you in the menopause, my sense is that you're all clinicians who really sit down with their patients and you want to know their stories, and I feel like that's what I'm looking for in doctors right now, is someone who's going to sit and listen and who's up on the latest research when it comes to hormone therapy, who wants to know about my symptoms and how they're impacting my life so that we can make that shared decision about the next right steps for me.
It occurred to me as you were saying that how lonely it can be to experience things. And what triggered it for me and what you were saying is that you're right. I think most of us that in the menopause, and I certainly do, I sit down and I talk to people. I do not write in front of my patients until the very end, and I say something silly like, I need to write something or I won't remember it next week when I dictate. But the fact that we're sitting down, like the physical act of sitting down and listening and not distracted. Meghan, I am an orthopod. So many women in my office are crying. And I don't think it's for any other reason, is that it can be lonely here in midlife unless we're talking about it, right?
Absolutely. It can be so lonely and kind of scary, right? I was just texting with a friend last night actually who is definitely in the menopause transition and is just struggling with not necessarily the symptoms. She's getting treatment for her symptoms, but she's struggling with the change, And if we don't give airtime to not only the physical changes, but how those physical changes can feel emotionally, it gets extra lonely, right? Because we feel like we're going crazy, like we must be the only ones who, are struggling. And then on the flip side too, I think, another new rule that really emerged for me in the menopause, after working on the menopause chapter, is that we also need to celebrate some of the things of menopause. And I sometimes worry that in talking about all of the tough stuff, are we scaring a younger generation in terms of like what they're in for when it comes to menopause? And sure, the more information you have, the more those symptoms can be like little red flags that go up that prompt you to talk to your doctor. But I think it's also important for women like us to really say, gosh, there's also some upsides, like
Oh, so
even
many.
right, even beyond just not having your period every month or having to worry about birth control. But it's like, I feel like I'm stepping into this new version of myself, in a way that feels really empowered and clear. And I think that's really important to give airtime to as well.
Especially, we're talking about 40s and into 50s to have this sense of hope, right? I think knowing some of the new rules and being very knowing what's happening. You used the example of brain, knowing that yes, there are chemical changes, the brain rewires, but it doesn't mean the end of the road if we step in front of it. So I think it gets a sense of hope.
Absolutely. And especially in midlife, I think, because, I interviewed Dr. Lisa Larkin for my book, who said something really poignant, which is that women in midlife have this really remarkable window of opportunity. Because if we start making changes to our diet, to our exercise routine, to our lifestyle, that's when you see the payoff down the road. Right. And so it's really important if you're a woman in midlife to focus on your health. She said sometimes the dog tends to get more vet appointments than women in midlife.
Are you kidding me?
Right? Gets doctor
Absolutely.
visits. And that's it's okay if you can resonate with that, if that resonates with you.
It's okay.
But It's okay, but it's also sort of like, uh-oh, if that's me, maybe it's time to take a look at, am I getting my annual primary care visit, well woman exam? Am I getting my cancer screenings? It's like you deserve that care. And even better, if you're with an amazing clinician who can talk to you about some of these lifestyle habits, they really do pay off later. I think sometimes our eyes roll when it's like, oh, don't tell me more about how I need to be exercising and sleeping well and eating an anti-inflammatory diet. But like the reason we hear this advice over and over is because it really does work. I mean, I don't need to preach that to you. I know I'm preaching to the choir here.
No, but what's interesting is sometimes I feel like we know what to do and we don't do it. And we know what to do and we don't do it. And in interviewing more than 100 clinicians, did you get a sense of maybe why we know what to do and don't do it? What is it about us? It's not just us, men do it too, but why do women know what to do and don't do it? Is it we really are too busy? What did the clinicians who you talked to say?
Yeah, I think it's really personal, and I think it's very common. I think women are busy. We're the ones, when it comes to health, we're the ones making doctor's appointments for everybody
everybody.
else, and the
Yeah.
vet appointments, and taking care of kids. I think especially when we come to talking about women in midlife, it's the sandwich generation as well, right? Not only are you caring for young kids oftentimes, but also aging parents. And so life can feel really full on. I'll speak personally to this. I mean, I have a very clear sense after working on this book that some of the best things I can do is lift weights, get my cardio in, steer clear of sugar. And am I 100% compliant with what I know to be something that is going to help my health now and in the future? No, life gets busy, work gets in the way. And I think really what I also heard from so many doctors is like, okay, that's okay. And then get back on the bandwagon. You don't need to start on a Monday. Just once you have the hit, just start small. Once you have this realization of like, gosh, I have been putting all my focus into other people and not myself, just make one small change. Start with 15 minutes, then grow it to the optimal routine.
I think little changes like that are so critical, and yet we assign ourselves guilt, or we assign ourselves, oh, that's so bad. When reality is, let's have the same grace we have with other people on ourselves. Well, you did so much work on this. I want to go through some body systems, and I'll choose a few, and I want us to learn from what you learned, and then after we go through a few, let's learn about some surprising things, body system wise. But if we start at the top, a lot of your work has been with the changes that happens to our brain, both physically and emotionally. And, wonderful scholars like Lisa Mosconi, whom of course, has really elucidated the fact that the brain is covered in estrogen receptors. And Robbie Brinton, another researcher who I was fortunate to meet at the FDA, talked about how the very metabolism of the brain changes as we lose our estrogen. What else did you learn that is so fascinating about brain aging and the big gaps in research that we need?
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest ahas is that the female brain really is different than the male brain in many different ways that we are just starting to uncover. And when we understand some of those differences, even if they're subtle, we can feel motivated to make changes to help protect our brain, And so I still think it shocks way too many women that we are 2/3 cases of Alzheimer's disease.
It's staggering, isn't it?
It's staggering. It really is. Maria, her father died of Alzheimer's disease, and she was First Lady of California at the time. And she said, this is not that long ago in the relative scheme of things. And she said, when she was asking, it was always women coming up to her saying, my mother had the same fate, my sister, my aunt. And she would talk to doctors saying like, why is it that more women than men are coming up to me? Why is it that women disproportionately suffer? And it was always like, well, women live longer. And that's turning out to not be true. That is not the reason. It turns out the menopause transition at midlife is a key moment, likely because of all of these estrogen receptors that are all over our brain that suddenly get starved of estrogen. And Dr. Mosconi, my goodness, I mean, she was shocked that nobody had actually figured out, like, she went to do research on estrogen in the brain and realized I have to start
You
from
have to do
zero.
it.
Exactly. She had to do it to
Yeah.
understand where these receptors were. And so it's remarkable how far behind we are. And every brain researcher I spoke to said, there are things we can do. Exercise being among the best. It really is like fuel for your brain, and especially at midlife. And lifting heavy weights can help us counter some of the changes happening in that dip in estrogen and its impact on the brain. So I think that's a big aha, is to at least know that menopause and getting older puts us and our brains as women at a special risk, but that's not all doom and gloom. We actually have a lot of control to prevent Alzheimer's or other cognitive issues as our fate.
There's some work right now that draws a correlation between high intensity exercise, high blood flow exercise, and brain health. But what I don't see is a clear dose response, meaning, come on, I've been taking care of people a long time, and the truth of everybody, including myself, is that sometimes we are a max min, meaning we want the maximum out of the minimum effort. It's just maybe human preservation of human nature. I have not found a complete dose curve. Did you find any dose curve in your work? Like 6 miles and your brain's good. I did not find that.
I have not found that either. And
Yeah.
and I think it's almost it's good news. I see it right now. Maybe we'll get that exact formula, right? But again, like, how about we do what we can with the information we have? That was really my takeaway, which is like, look, as the research hopefully will keep getting done and we will continue to get more specific answers, like add some sprint interval training here
Just
and
do
there.
that. Yes.
Do your basic cardio. And rather than be such a stickler about exactly how much it has to be, try to use the baseline advice and then make it your own, and don't beat yourself up if it's a little less than what you were going for.
Right, because we do not need another reason to be ashamed of our behaviors, right?
No,
Totally not.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Or another reason to make things more complicated
Yeah.
sometimes than they have to be.
That's right.
I'm thinking now about a doctor I interviewed about cycle syncing, which had a big moment, and actually it's like, she coaches, she's a medical doctor who coaches elite athletes in ultra running. And she said, look, if clue into your cycle. If you're feeling tired because you're at a certain point in your cycle and you don't feel like doing the training miles you were supposed to, okay, get them done at a different point. But also, when you think about life, certainly if you're racing, you're going to race at different parts of your cycle. You're going to have to do different aspects of your life at different points of your cycle. So just,
Work with
simplify
it.
things, work with it, and simplify things for yourself,
Yeah, great advice. The number one killer of women is heart disease. And I don't know that enough women know that, right? When I lived in Atlanta, they asked me to be the president of the American Heart Association in Atlanta, which is a little weird for an orthopod. But then I got to thinking about it. All of my family dies of heart disease. That's what we die of. So there's a huge role or there's a huge indication of the role of hormones in microvascular heart disease. What did the researchers have to say about that? Because I don't think everybody knows that.
No, and what was shocking and really sad is that our awareness that heart disease is our number one killer as women is actually going down. So we're taking steps backward. And
Why is that?
that's alarming. I interviewed Dr. Martha Gulati about this, who is a tremendous preventive cardiologist. And we don't necessarily know. I mean, honestly, I think I looked to the media. I sort of blamed myself after I got off the phone with her, thinking like, we're not writing about it as we should as journalists to really do our part to help spread the word about this. I think there's also too, just this sense that heart disease happens to older women. At 46, do I really need to be worried about heart disease now?
Well, actually,
I have enough information that yes, I do. But most of my peers, it's not even on their radar. What they're most afraid of is breast cancer. We've done a really good job with awareness around that, but not such a great job about awareness with heart disease.
Do you think that's because, not number one, the breast cancer people have done a great job educating, but do you think it's also that at 46, for instance, even though now would be the critical time to get in front of that, it's hard to visualize yourself at 66 or 76 when it might be more relevant or more immediate, not more relevant, more immediate?
Absolutely. I mean, think back again. Here's advice for young women. It's like live your life and have fun, but remember your choices now will impact you later. You know, I think when we're young, we think we're going to be invincible. Like I am a very fair of Irish descent, and the amount of time I spent in the sun that I wish I could take back now.
Slathered?
Oh, I would have put zinc oxide all over my body, you know, knowing what I know now and having the health impacts that I have now from years ago sun exposure. And that's the attitude we all need to take, you know, and I'm trying to take around my heart health now because I'm with you, Dr. Wright. Everyone in my family goes from heart disease. And so I would be a fool not to be thinking about what I can do for my heart. And in all this conversation about weight training, which I love, and I have really doubled down on my strength training routine, I make sure I get cardio in as well, you know, because when you learn about what cardio does and the pumping of that vasculature in your heart and how it keeps it pliable, I've also started taking a statin because I do have slightly elevated cholesterol enough to make it so that a low dose statin is helpful for me. And I think before working on this book, I would have been like, no, I'm going to handle it with diet and exercise. And now I'm like, well, I've had multiple doctors now tell me, no, that's recommended for you. And so I'm listening, you know, because I know that the heart stuff is the heart. Yeah, we just don't think about it early enough.
That's right. Because the reality is, like so many things, it's largely preventable.
Yeah. And I will say too, a big eye opener in the heart health section of my book is how heart attack symptoms show up very differently in women than they do in men, which I think
Yes.
we also need to do a better job talking about, right? The symptoms are often a lot more subtle. It's not the grabbing your arm or the crushing
Falling on the
chest pain.
floor.
Not all the time, right? It can be that, but not all the time. It can be that sort of nausea or jaw pain or things that as women, we might just power through, brush aside, say, you know, we've been taught to buck up, buttercup. And so that's what we're going to do. But when we know these symptoms, when they can be even in the back of our minds, we can say, uh-oh, and then listen to our intuition as well. A lot of cardiologists said, you know, it's like if it's nausea, but it's also that sneaking suspicion that something's off. These are things to listen to.
Not only to listen to, but I recently had a heart workup by Suzanne Steinbaum, who's a cardiologist in New York. And even the way a woman's heart responds to the VO2 max test, which is torture, right? Or the way my heart rate raised at top exertion is very nuanced for women. It's very different than a man presents. So in your work, did you ever come across it's your cultural reference called the Yentl syndrome?
Oh,
Have you ever come across
I
that?
haven't I haven't heard of the Yentl syndrome. No, tell me
So
more.
it's that concept. It may have been, this is maybe a reference that's way before you were born, but there was this movie with Barbara Streisand called Yentl. Have you ever heard of that movie? It was a
Yeah.
movie about, the premise of the movie was she was a biblical scholar, but in the time she lived, only men could be a biblical scholar. So to get to do it, she had to pose as a man. And so in medicine, Yentl syndrome is this phenomenon where unless you present as a man, you don't get the same care. And for heart disease, this is where I first learned about it. These things you just described, you're tired, you have a headache, you're fatigued, you're nauseated, didn't present like a man, so you're sent home to take a nap, right? Isn't that
Meanwhile, you're having a
fascinating?
heart attack.
You're having a heart attack.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
It really is. Yeah. And Dr. Steinbaum, I interviewed her for the heart health section of my
Yeah.
book as well. And it's just when you know these subtle differences, when you can understand, and you don't need a medical degree as an average woman, you just need to know the basics, right? To then be able to say, oh, okay, now that I know, what questions should I ask my doctor if I want to be proactive? After working on this chapter, I started talking to my primary care physician about when is the time for me to see a preventive cardiologist given my history, and I want to get myself to New York to do that same workup that you
Yeah,
talked
I
about because it
know.
sounds world class. And I think that's the thing is like it can feel scary for a lot of people. It's like, gosh, one more thing to worry about. I'm already worried about cancer happening in younger and younger people. I'm already worried about so much, right? And sure, it's a lot to hold, but again, I think if we can have the basic information, that's when we can start to have it feel more manageable and to say, okay, well, at least I know this so that if I start to experience things, if I start to get that niggling feeling that something's wrong,
That
I'll
we
be
go
able to
check it
trust.
out.
Yeah, I'll trust myself. I'll trust my story and I'll get it checked out.
So you and I have talked a lot before about the musculoskeletal things that happen with aging, but what did you learn? I'm just so fascinated by this. Teach me what you learned about the gut and how our digestion changes and that whole system, which just seems like about food, but it is so not.
Oh, totally. The gut is just the most remarkable organ in the body and it has so much going on and what I think was a big aha is that microbiome research, the research that the into all of these bugs that really um, are remarkable drivers of health or not is very, very new. We are really just at the, just starting to scrape the surface. I think, yeah, it's a complicated topic, gut health. It drives again so many aspects of our overall health, from our immune health to our hormonal health, et cetera. I think we're finally starting to talk more about it, honestly, in the weight loss conversation,
Yeah.
with the GLP-1
GLP-1s.
drugs. Yeah, starting to really become so ubiquitous. We're starting to say, oh, wait, our own guts make these weight health hormones. So what do I need
Yeah.
to know about this gut health, especially as we transition through big hormonal transitions like menopause? I think my big takeaway and what I'm trying to do personally now after talking to microbiome researchers is, in addition to getting my adequate protein intake, which we're talking a lot about, I really am thinking about fiber because, man, fiber is like liquid gold for the gut bugs in our microbiome. It's like that they really need that. And I just think I feel better when I'm focusing on getting enough fiber. So yeah, it's a cool topic. We need more information. We need more research again, but what we are learning is pretty cool.
I think what is surprising to me as I do deep dives into all the wonderment of bone is that bone and the gut have a direct communication pathway, right? Like, what are they doing talking to each other? Well, it makes sense when you think the bone is a storehouse, the gut is the entry port, if you will. But it brings to light the fact that every organ system in our body is connected, not how we've separated it either by the doctor who you will see or the uh, any segmented thing. The body doesn't work that way, interestingly.
Yeah, the gut to the brain, right? The gut to the bone, the
That's
gut
right.
to the endocrine system. It really, and it's cool when you think about it, right? You take a minute to just close your eyes and climb into your body. And I think all of us are like, of course it's all related, right? Like, of course it has to be. It's this beautiful ecosystem. But we move through the world without really thinking about this, right?
We don't think about it all until we're either in pain or we started off the conversation off camera talking about the remarkable fact that autoimmune is so prevalent in women. And that is when inside conversations go wrong, right? We start identifying, our immune system starts identifying ourself as not us, but as something that has to be attacked. And I feel, as a clinician, I know very little about that. Did you get a sense that we're far down the road with the researchers you talked to? Or again, there's gaping, I see it in your face. There are gaping white spaces that we need to fill.
Totally. That it's unfortunately the latter. We just, everyone I spoke to says we are really behind on autoimmune our understanding of why women disproportionately are impacted by autoimmune disease. There are some theories, when it comes to the female immune system, that second X chromosome likely plays a role. And so it's important to know those theories, understand the basics of what scientists know. And unfortunately, that is a big gaping chasm in our understanding.
And I wonder how we get in front of it quickly. I mean, I really don't have a solution. Clinical research takes a long time.
Yeah. And money, a lot of time and a lot of money. And I think it's definitely an area I'm hopeful that we'll start to focus more on.
Well, me too. And I think one autoimmune problem that women seem to bring up to me a lot is thyroid immune problems, such as Hashimoto's thyroiditis. Like, why all of a sudden are we attacking our own thyroid? It has to be tied to hormones, obviously. I just don't know how, right?
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. More theories like hormones, stress, you know, yeah. And I think it points to the importance of cluing into our symptoms, right? Because it's like, let's keep track of symptoms so that when you bring those to your doctor might say, let's make sure we check your thyroid. Let's make sure we're having these conversations. Even with autoimmune disease, it's like different symptoms because there aren't necessarily tests all the time to definitively say that you have a certain autoimmune disease. Symptoms often help your doctor make that shared decision and say, I suspect it's this, And so I think it points to, in lieu of the research answers, we need to take some ownership where we can and really say, okay, here's what I know about my body. Let's have a conversation now so you can help me.
So as we've progressed in very young women, we're talking about becoming advocates, CEOs, we're becoming knowledgeable, even about anatomy. And now that we're talking about perimenopause and menopause, and we've covered, some of the gaping holes and yet remarkable ways that we can come to understand ourselves, what about the baby booming women who were left out of, there were no conversations for them? Now they're in the middle of solid aging. Did you get a sense that there's hope for them?
Yeah, I think, as Dr. Kelly Kasperson says, man, these women are rightfully pissed
Very
off,
angry.
right? Very
So
angry. And
angry.
I think about my mother, like she's in her early 70s now and she was never given the option of hormone therapy, right? And now she's paying the price for it on bone medication, osteoporosis, and she and what's sad to me is that she really took steps all her life to try to be healthy, to do the right things, And what I say to her based on my research is it's not too late. You can start a strength training workout that might not necessarily get you out of osteoporosis at this stage, maybe, but maybe not. But that's okay. It's still beneficial, right? Take those daily walks for your heart. It's like that really is, it's cliche, but I think we repeat it over and over for good reason, which it really never is too late to make changes that can help your health down the road. But yeah, unfortunately, there was a whole generation of women left out of really important conversations about a choice about hormone therapy. And that is a shame. It's a real shame.
And I agree with you. I am in the same camp that there's never age or skill level. Your body is going to respond to you, even if you were left out or there was no conversation. It's not that they were left out. There was no conversation for most of their youngness. So from all the conversations you've had with experts and not even with the experts, you talk to a lot of just consumer women like me. Are there persisting common misconceptions that you just wish that we could put aside?
Yes, I think, we have talked about a big one, which is heart health. Heart health is something I have to worry about later down the road. Now, today is the day. Take a real look at your family history, at your personal history. Interestingly, on heart health, is that if you ever have pregnancy complications, that can put you at increased risk for heart disease earlier.
Like
And it's just
preeclampsia, for
Like
instance?
preeclampsia, like gestational diabetes, these are aspects of your gynecologic history that you may think you don't have to worry about because they cleared up immediately after you gave birth, but they're actually things you should bring up, when it comes to heart health. I think another big misconception is that breast cancer prevention is all about your annual mammogram. Yes, that's a really important screening tool. And a big aha, it's something I did, something I told my mom to do and my sister, is take one of the risk assessment quizzes online, like the Tyrer-Cuzick. I did that and ended up with a score that didn't put me over the high into the high risk, but it did help me have an amazing conversation with my gynecologist about the right breast health screening plan for me, breast cancer screening. It's an amazingly, it takes maybe 10 minutes, and you have to answer questions, but it just helped me feel so empowered. And my mom told me that when she did the test and brought it to her doctor did it again with her in the room, and her eyes were lit up. She was like, "Oh my gosh, I wish more patients would come to me with this." It's amazing. So I think breast cancer screening involves more than just the
A
mammogram, right?
mammogram. Yeah.
Exactly. And then I think, kind of on the whole, man, we can't outsource our care. We really have to take ownership. And the doctors that we work with, they can be amazing, right? But you can only help us as much as we bring to you. So really taking ownership of our health, not just from what can I do from a lifestyle perspective and do my strength training and my, nutrition and get all of that dialed, but God, like, what can I bring to my doctor to help her help me in an optimal way, I think is really big.
Huge. And so as we wrap up, I've heard you say several things about the way you have optimized your lifestyle since writing this book. You still do cardio, but we don't do it as much as you did. You are really buckling down on your strength training, right?
Absolutely.
I heard you talk about high protein diet, but you also mentioned fiber that you're focusing on. What else changed in your own life? Well, I'm sure you were always an advocate. I'll put advocate on this side. You're always an advocate. You're still an advocate. Did anything else change now after you've written the new rules?
Yeah, I created a lot of new rules for myself after working on this book. I broke up with alcohol. Man, when
Yes.
you look at the research, you really see how there is no part of drinking alcohol that is going to help your health.
Yeah.
And I feel so much better for it.
Yeah.
I also, oh gosh, I have interviewed so many amazing urologists now who have really opened my eyes to the importance of low dose local vaginal estrogen for certainly treatment, but also prevention of a lot of the different symptoms that start to come into play once you hit menopause. So I am way more well versed in having conversations about hormone therapy with my doctors, which I think is huge. Yeah, and I think overall, I feel like I've doubled down even more on how I show up with my doctors. The ownership I take, like we were just talking about, in what I bring to them, the symptoms I clue into, the lists of symptoms that I bring to them, so that they can really optimally help me, and I had a cool experience with a new primary care physician as I was reporting this book. I moved and needed a new doctor, and she actually said to me, like, she just looked so excited when we were having that initial appointment, and she was like, gosh, it's so fun for me to talk to a patient who comes
Who's
with
engaged?
this engaged and comes with this baseline knowledge so that we can talk about even more. We can cover more ground. And not only that, but talk about like how to really optimize in different areas. And I feel like that was such a passion of mine when I was putting together this book. Is I want all women to feel that excitement from their doctors. Like, oh, look at you. You are starting with this baseline knowledge that's going to help us get you even like more information about how to care for yourself.
That is remarkable. I would love that kind of engagement. And I do have that, but that you are sometimes you're like, how can I be a good patient? Well, there you go. You just be engaged, know yourself, be ready to talk about it. It's so important.
Yeah. And my hope is that this book really helps all women feel like they can be that, empowered to we're smart, we're strong. Women's health is really having a moment right now, and a long overdue moment. We're in an exciting time where we are making tracks when it comes to making progress in the research, and we're talking about it. So keep talking about it, not only with your doctors, but with your friends, with each other. The more that we can talk about these things that are so important to our well-being, the better we'll feel.
Absolutely. And so for those of you watching, I want you to pick up the new rules for women's health. And it is okay for you to open it to the page and bring it to your doctor and say, the author Meghan Rabbitt said this. Can we talk about this? So I hope you will all do that. And Meghan, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much. It was a true honor, honestly. Thank you.
It was my honor. Thank you.